What is up, guys? Welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. Today I want to talk to you guys about your hunter access to your stands and your blinds. Now, this will be my 25th deer season, and this is something, these hunter accesses, that I've only started to consider maybe only a few years ago. So I'm actually relatively new to this as well, but they have made such a difference in the success of my hunt and the other people that hunt with me since we've started to take these into consideration. So, well, what is a hunter access? Well, it's simply how you access your stand, right? But did you know that if you're accessing your stand poorly, you could be having a very negative effect on your hunt? Now, I used to think, you just get into your stand, you get in there as quietly as possible, you try to sneak in there, and you sit and you bust deer out on the walk-in, and maybe a couple hours they'll come back. That is not the case. If you bust deer when you're walking in, the chances of them coming back are not likely. I mean, they will eventually, but they're probably first going to come back at night, and then once they discover that that is safe, then they'll start to come back during the day again. But this process can take several days. And if you spook a mature buck, that process is even longer. I'm talking about those does and fawns being spooked off of an area. They'll come back relatively quickly, like in a couple days, but those bucks and then those mature bucks just keep adding days if you're spooking those guys off of your property. So you definitely do not want to be spooking deer walking in. Well, how do we avoid this? Well, first off, we really need to consider our stand placement when we're placing them so that we can access them without spooking deer. And that also means that when we're thinking about placing our attractions, like our food plots, our water holes, our mock scrapes, travel corridors, all of that fun stuff, that we're placing them in an area on our property that leaves another chunk of our property for us to access in on where we don't expect the deer to be. Now, obviously, a random deer can be wandering through an area and you just happen to cross paths, but the chance of that happening is not as great as walking in right through a food plot at the end of the day, right? Like, we know that where deer are during a certain part of a day is also what gives us a good hunter access. So your deer are going to be on your food sources, like your food plots, at the end of the day, and they're going to be returning to bedding area at the beginning of the day. So it's okay to access through a food plot in the morning. It is not okay to access through a food plot in the afternoon. Just like it's okay to access through a bedding area or even hunt a bedding area in the morning, as long as you're there before light, but it's not okay to go through a bedding area in the middle of the day because that's when the deer are going to be there. So once we've discovered a good place to place our stand on our property in relation to our attractions, the other thing we want to do is spruce it up a little bit to give it some help to hide us. Well, how do we do that? Well, obviously screening, right? So I talk a lot about screening. There's all sorts of it. There's switchgrass, there's conifers, there's shrubs, there's whatever you can get to put stem count between you and the deer so that they don't see you. And just like I've been doing for 25 years, you also need to walk quietly, right? I think most of us know that. Now, the other thing is you really have to be careful of your wind. You have to assume that anything downwind of you 100 yards away is going to be blown out and you're going to spook deer out of that area. So when you're deciding which stand or blind to hunt in a given day, you're going to want to consider which way the wind is blowing, not only when you're sitting on the stand, but which way that wind is blowing while you're walking along your hunter access as well. Now, another thing we can use to really spruce up our hunter access is the topography of the land. So down here in southeastern Wisconsin, it's a lot more of like rolling hills and such. I do behind me here, you can see my blind here, there is a little bit of a hill here, and I access from the back side of that hill into the stand here. But on my northwestern Wisconsin property, I have topography for days. So two of my stands specifically up there are accessed off the road. You go down into a dip and you come up and then you get into your stand where when you're on the ground, the deer would still not be able to see you because you haven't crested the hill yet. But once you get up into the box, you can now see down onto the attractions And that is something that is just an amazing hunter access, because those deer can literally be on those attractions while you're walking in, and you're maybe 100 feet of elevation below them coming up the backside of a hill before you finally peek over the top to see them. So you can sneak right up on them even if they are on those attractions. Although you don't want to be accessing a stand or a blind that's on an attraction that the deer would be on at that time. You would obviously want to get there before them and then let them come in to you. But here in southeastern Wisconsin, I'm a lot more reliant on things like switchgrass and conifers and shrubs and such. So what you can see right here is I have some switchgrass coming up. So I tried to set you guys where you can actually see down my hunter access here, because the switchgrass hasn't gotten tall enough at this time of year to completely block it out. But you can see that my hunter access is actually dug into the ground. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go rent a mini excavator and dig a trench that goes all the way to all of your stands and tear up your land and make it seem like a World War I battlefield out there with a bunch of trench systems. But in this case, this hill here that I talked about earlier, what it was doing was trapping water behind the hill, and the chicken run was getting flooded out. So we actually dug this trench through to drain some of the water down to the creek that's down here, instead of letting it pool up over here. Well, when I built this food plot and this stand here last year, I used that trench as my hunter access, and I actually put some fencing over the top of it and started training vines and stuff to grow over the top of it and completely enclose it. I also threw some switchgrass down on the side of it so that it will grow up and lay down on top of that fence as well. So I'm essentially walking in through a tunnel. Now, that is an ultimate perfect, I would say, top of the line hunter access. I'm not saying you need to go above and beyond and go that hardcore at it. You can get away with much less, but I just wanted to do it because I thought it would be fun, and so I did it, and it has actually been very successful for me. So what you want to do when you're talking about your hunter access, though, is like I was saying, I have switchgrass right here, right in front of the box, right? And this is set up as a 2-person blind. I did that because I have young kids, and I hope that one day they get old enough where they'll want to sit with me in the stand and then, you know, maybe hunt themselves. So I was thinking ahead here. I got this thing out here so that the deer get used to it, so that the trees can grow in around it. Again, that's something like when you're placing your stands or your blinds, try to hide them into the tree line like this. Like, get those trees to grow around them. I'm working on getting more to grow on the other side to really enclose this box in this tree line. But you get something low like switchgrass in front of the blind, because it won't grow up so tall that you can't see out the window, right? Otherwise you'll be out there trying to trim the grass or hedge trim off at the height that your stand is at, and sometimes you have to do that. I'm already seeing some of these that are going to need to get pruned up a little bit before season, but you get this first layer of cover between you and your attraction. You guys are actually standing on the food plot right now looking back. So you get this switchgrass growing in here, you get the blind in there. Beyond that, you guys can see that there's some spruce and some pines back here. And so what that means is, like, from the road back here, I walk in and I walk past some spruce, then I walk past some pines, I enter this trench system here, and then I move in towards the box here with the switchgrass covering me up here. Now, like I said, I'm not expecting a deer to actually be standing on the food plot when I'm trying to access this, but they will be very close. Those does and fawns will be bedded down right on the edge of this food plot. So they'll only be maybe 50 to 100 yards away from me when I'm accessing this box during the hunting season. So obviously I don't want them to see me, because if I spook them, the chances are that those bucks and those mature bucks that are in the next layers of bedding area are going to spook as well, or are just simply going to follow the does wherever the does went, which is not here. So you definitely need to be very careful, especially if you're hunting a food source, because you have to assume that those does and fawns are bedded down right on the edge of that food source, right in that first layer of cover, which, depending on how big your food plot is, may only be 50 yards away. So that's a very important thing. You need to be very quiet. You need to monitor which way your wind is blowing, and you need cover screening so that they cannot see you, because their eyes work in the woods a lot different than ours do. We're always in the woods looking for movement just like they are, but they're doing it every day of the year. We do it a couple days out of the year. So they are so much better at it than we are. They see one little flicker of movement and they're gonna bust you. So if you build a screen so that they can't even see you, there's no chance that they're gonna see that flicker of movement, and they're not gonna bust you. As long as your wind's not blowing towards them, as long as you're being quiet, you will be able to sneak into your stands and out of your stands without busting deer, and you should have a successful hunt because of that. Welcome inside the blind. I wanted to bring you guys in here to show you one more thing real quick. Now, I know you've probably spent way more hours inside a blind like this than you care to admit, but I want to show you this because it's important of my overall strategy of what I have going on with this blind and this hunter access. So this blind actually only has the one window right here. There are no windows on the back side. Now, one of the reasons for that is because I have this hunter access like this, that's a trench with a fence over the top of it, the deer do not cross behind me. That's intentional because I'm trying to keep the deer in front of me on the food plot, right? But it's also advantageous because it lets me build a blind that's completely black inside here. So when I'm hunting, I actually don't wear camo. I tend to wear darker clothes, and I'll actually put on like black face paint. So when I'm in here, if you go out there and look in here, you can't even see me in here even if I am moving, because it's just a flat black surface on a flat background. And this paint that I used on here is like ultra flat black, like as zero shine in it as I can get, and it's starting to fade a little bit. I probably could touch it up before this next season, but I just wanted to let you guys in on that, of how you can, like, even though you're sitting in your blind like this, you can really hide inside of it by not having windows on all sides of it, because then the deer can't see your silhouette moving in the opening because there is no back window in it. So consider that when you're building your blinds. If you have maybe like a giant tree or something that you're not going to be able to see through anyway, maybe block that part of the blind off a little bit so that you can kind of tuck into that wall where there isn't a window and prevent the deer from seeing your silhouette moving through the blind. Now, another thing I do up north on my northwestern Wisconsin property is I take advantage of the topography there. So even if there are windows on all sides, I put the stand or the blind in a way like on top of a hill that if the deer is actually looking into the blind, it can't see through window to window because it's seeing in one window and then seeing the ceiling on the blind. So again, I have a backdrop immediately behind me if I'm looking through that window, so that it's harder for it to detect movement by seeing a silhouette moving through an opening. So, all right, I hope that helped. That's just an extra little tidbit I wanted to add to this video while I was out here talking about hunter access and stand locations. Now, if you guys felt like you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so we can continue to grow this hunting community. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.